So having learned the life cycle of gymnosperms, it's quite easy to understand the life cycle of angiosperms. So what do we call angiosperms in an alternative term? It's flowering plants. So within no time, let's learn the life cycle of angiosperms. So as you know, even angiosperms have diploid life cycle. So what do we start with? Yes, you are right, sporophyte. And sporophytes are diploid. And now comes the difference between here. See, the sporophyte in gymnosperms uh, were having cones, male and female cones. And now, when we are coming into the angiosperms, instead of cones, they have flowers. The male flower and the female flower. Now, instead of microsporophyll, here we have stamen. Alright, which is the male reproductive part of the male flower. And instead of megasporophyll, here we have pistil, or it's also known as carpel. So what is it? Microsporophyll and megasporophyll. Now, instead of microsporangia, we have instead of microsporangia, we have pollen sac, which is found in anther of stamen. I'll explain to you regarding stamen and pistil. First, let us complete the life cycle. And within carpel and within ovary, we have ovule, which is the megasporangia of flowering plants or the angiosperms. So pollen sac is basically the microsporangia, and ovule is basically the megasporangia. Now, here we have meiosis taking place, which produces microspore, and meiosis within megasporangia produces megaspore. Now, the microspore produces, yes, you are right, male gametophyte. And the megaspore produces female gametophyte. Alright. The male gametophyte in angiosperms is also known as pollen grain. Same wording, right? Even for gymnosperms, we use the same word. And the female gametophyte of megaspore is known as embryo sac. Now, the male gametophyte or the pollen grain bears the male gamete, and within the embryo sac we have the egg. Both of them undergoes fertilization to form zygote, and the zygote in turn forms the sporophyte. So this is the life cycle of angiosperms. Now let's look at the difference between the life cycle of angiosperm and that of gymnosperms. So the first difference being, here we have the male cone and female cone, but in the case of angiosperms, we have the male flower and female flower. Basically, here we just say microsporophyll, microsporangia, megasporophyll, megasporangia. But coming to angiosperms, we have specific names like stamen, pistil, pollen sac, ovule, and you have to learn all of them. And now, the male gametophyte is known as pollen grain, and it's the same wording in gymnosperms too. But the female gametophyte in gymnosperms is known as endosperm, but the female gametophyte in angiosperm is known as embryo sac. And the female gametophyte in gymnosperm produced archegonia, but here it produces the egg. Now, here we have completed the life cycle of angiosperms, but there are few new terms for you. So let's see. So first of all, we have a term like stamen, another term pistil. So in order to illustrate these parts, I would have to tell you the parts of a flowering plant. Basically, we have two parts, a vegetative part and a reproductive part. So vegetative part are like stem, root, these are the vegetative parts. But what are the reproductive part? They are the stamen and pistil. Now, the stamen is the male reproductive part and the pistil or carpel is known as the female reproductive part. Okay, fine. Now, let's have an illustration of a flower. Let's see. All right, now let us give it a shade so that it will be better for you to discriminate between the sepals and the petals. Not a nice looking flower, right? But that's all right, we need just concepts. Am I right or wrong? Okay, so basically we have the sepal, petal, and then we have the reproductive organs. This over here is known as the pistil or carpel. And the pistil or carpel, let me draw it individually. The pistil or carpel has got three parts. This platform like part is known as the stigma. It's at the stigma where the pollination takes place. Like consider an insect. Consider an insect. It bears the male gamete, and when it comes over here to suck the nectar or something of that, and then the male gamete is deposited at the stigma. And another part of pistil is the style, and the bottom swollen part is also known as ovary, and within the ovary you have the ovule. All right, and where else did you see ovule? So ovule is also known as the megasporangium of flowering plants. Now you have learned about the female reproductive part. Now let's have a look at the male reproductive part. And now this is the stamen or the male reproductive part. Let's have an individual look. So a stamen has got two parts, the anther and the filament. Now it is within the anther that the microsporangia are produced. And what are the microsporangia? They are the pollen sac. For example, if I give it a cut in this plane, okay, then there will be a tetrad, like the pollen sac is arranged in 4 in number. We call it as a tetrad. All right, so this is the reproductive part of a flowering plant. So you have understood all these terms, I suppose. Now coming to the spores, all the microspores which are produced in the microsporangia are released or undergoes meiosis undergoes meiosis and they are released. But the same thing matters even here. Like in gymnosperms, we saw a megaspore mother cell, and it was the only diploid cell that underwent meiosis to form the female gametophyte. Even here, within the ovary and within the ovule, which is the megasporangium, only one cell, only one diploid cell undergoes meiosis, and it's known as MMC, megaspore mother cell. Alright, and this undergoes meiosis, and as you know, when meiosis takes place, we have 4 haploid structures, and even here 3 degenerates, and we are left with a single megaspore. And now this megaspore undergoes a series of 3 mitoses, wherein a series of 3 mitoses wherein there is just karyokinesis, but no, there is karyokinesis but no cytokinesis. I know these words are new to you. We have to learn. Karyokinesis means we have division of the nucleus. For example, if this is a cell, then after mitosis, as you know, it's a it's an equational division. So normally after mitosis, what happens? We have 2 similar cells, haploid, and there is division of nucleus. For example, the intermediary stage here is that this within the cell the nucleus divides, and then we have cytokinesis, which means the cell itself divides to form 2 cells. All right, but here what happens is that cytokinesis doesn't take place. So after first mitosis, what do we have here? There are 2 nuclei, and after second mitosis we have 4 nuclei, and after third mitosis, what do we have? After third mitosis we have 8 nuclei. 1 2 3 4 5 6 and 7 8. We have 8 nuclei, and this 8 nuclei bearing structure is known as the embryo sac. Alright, and now you have to revise what we saw regarding the gymnosperms. Within the gymnosperms, there was equal mitosis. Even there were karyokinesis and cytokinesis. But here cytokinesis was absent, and we got an embryo sac. Now we have to understand the embryo sac in particular. So what happens is that at this stage, the embryo sac develops into a structure like this. The upper 3 cells moves to the upper part and it forms the antipodals. Are you getting this? And the middle 2 nuclei stays at the middle and forms the polar nuclei. So we have the antipodals, the central polar nuclei, and then at the bottom these 2 cells forms the synergids. What do we call them? Synergids. Whereas we have another cell in between them, and it's called as the egg or the female gamete. Now fertilization has to take place over here, right? So I'll give you a peripheral idea about what's fertilization. Actually, you will learn a lot about this in the morphology of flowering plants, but let's have an overview. So as I told you, this is the female part, and when the male pollen grain reaches over here. It forms a pollen tube, and the male gametes moves through this pollen tube and reaches the ovule, and within the ovule it reaches the embryo sac. So let us see. Sorry. So over here we have the antipodals, the central nuclei, the synergids, and then we have the egg. So here we have the development of pollen sac. Okay, so within pollen sac there is descent of two gametes. Am I right or wrong? Okay, I'll represent it in different colors so it becomes easy for you to recognize. So we have two gametes, male gametes, coming through the pollen tube. Now upon reaching the embryo sac, this male gametes enters into the synergids, and once they enter the synergid, one of the male gamete fuses with the central polar nuclei. So central polar nuclei, both of them being haploid, and it's now joined by one of the male gamete. So even the male gamete is haploid. Now what do we get? We get a triploid structure. Am I right or wrong? A triploid structure, and we call it as primary endosperm nucleus. All right, or PEN. So primary endosperm nucleus was formed by the fusion of male gamete and central polar nuclei. All right. Now the other male gamete fuses with the egg. So fuses with the egg. Egg fuses with the other male gamete and forms zygote, which is 2N. So the production of primary endosperm nucleus and zygote involves two fertilization, right? So this is also known as double fertilization. So double fertilization is a phenomenon exhibited by the flowering plants or the angiosperms. And the formation of zygote by the fusion of male gamete and female gamete has a name, syngamy. So double fertilization includes syngamy and triple fusion. Triple fusion. All right. So that's the thing. So after this fusion, the antipodals degenerate and both the synergids also degenerates. Means they fade off. Antipodals and synergids degenerate. And the embryo sacs becomes something like this. Here we have the zygote, and here we have the primary endosperm nucleus. Primary endosperm nucleus and zygote. Another thing about embryo sac is that embryo sac, here let me illustrate. Here embryo sac is a 7-celled and 8-nucleated structure. See, let us see. So we have 3 antipodals, so 3 cells. We have 2 synergids and 1 egg. So then we have 6 cells, and this whole cell, let us consider it as 1 cell. So 6 plus 1, 7 cell condition. And now let us count the number of nuclei. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is the 7-celled and 8-nucleated structure. So that completes the life cycle of angiosperms, and here we conclude the chapter Plant Kingdom. Thank you for your patient listening.